Thưa quý vị, thưa các bạn, chúng ta đang trò chuyện với ông Rama Martin, nhà kinh tế học. Ông nguyên là chuyên gia kinh tế trưởng của Ngân hàng Thế giới tại Việt Nam. Thưa ông Rama Martin, tôi xin được hỏi ông là vì sao ông lại rất là quan tâm tới những cái khu tập thể cũ của Hà Nội ở thời bao cấp như thế này? Trong một quyển sách của ông đã chụp rất là nhiều những bức ảnh thú vị.
Thank you for having me with you. Very pleased to be here. My interest in the Hutabte is part of a broader interest. I lived for 8 years in Hanoi, 2002 to 2010. I have been coming to Vietnam for maybe 17, 18 years now, and I love Hanoi. Hanoi is a very special city. But some people see at the pretty side as part of the characters. You have the lakes, you have the opera house. But the personality of a city goes beyond that. And I find that the Hutabte are part of the personality of Hanoi. You cannot think of Hanoi without these yellow buildings that by now look a bit like bird cages with all the balconies growing on the sides. That's also part of the personality of Hanoi.
Khi mà chụp những bức ảnh về khu chung cư thì Rama Martin có bình luận rằng là với việc xây dựng ra hàng nghìn căn hộ mỗi một năm thì Hà Nội cũng như là những cái tôi xin lỗi nói lại nhé, với việc xây dựng hàng nghìn cái khu chung cư, với việc xây dựng hàng nghìn cái căn hộ tập thể trong vòng một năm thì là thành phố Hà Nội cũng đã cố gắng đảm bảo cho người dân có được những cái nơi ở của mình. Tuy nhiên thì cái diện tích ở quá chật hẹp thì cũng tạo ra rất là nhiều những vấn đề. Thưa ông Rama, ông có thể bình luận gì về nếu như nhìn về những cái chung cư thời bao cấp thì chúng ta có thể hiểu được gì về đời sống của người dân Hà Nội và người dân Việt Nam thời bao cấp ạ?
I read quite a lot about Hanoi, as I told you, because of my love of Hanoi. So I was trying to understand more the logic behind this Hutabte, and it was part of the logic of the subsidy period. It was an idea of living collectively. You know, today Vietnamese people will dream of building their own individual house, but at the time that was not an option. The idea was everybody lives collectively, and it was so extreme that at the beginning there was the idea that people will share the kitchen and they will share the bathrooms, because it was a way of building the new man who will be less selfish, who will be available to interact and to cooperate with others. Of course, it didn't work. We all want to have our own kitchen and be with our own family when we cook and when we eat, so it didn't work at all. But that was the kind of mentality that was behind it. It also didn't work in the sense that in spite of all the effort for construction, it was not enough. The city was not able to accommodate everybody. So these were times when there were very strong restrictions in moving to the cities because the city could not grow just with these buildings. They became better over time. So when you take the ones built at the end of the subsidy period, when you take the ones around Zanvo Street, around what is now the Hanoi Hotel, all that area, they were starting to be bigger, but they were still very narrow. So people had to be creative in how to create space, and that's how you got all these constructions, crazy constructions. And now when you look at that Hutabte, at times you think, oh, this is like a slum, but a slum that goes up instead of a slum that goes like this. But at the same time, they are not slums, because the people who got these apartments were the elite of the state, were the civil servants of the ministries and journalists and state-owned enterprises. So it looks like slums, but with very educated people, very well-connected people. I'm sure a lot of the people who are helping us with this program today probably grew up in a Hutabte, where the new middle class, professional middle class in Vietnam is coming from.
Nhưng mà chưa kể là trong lúc đó thì họ còn nuôi một ít lợn và gà trong chính cái nhà tắm của họ nữa. Thế ông bình luận gì về chuyện này?
Yes, I've heard stories people raising porks. Yeah.
Also that in some of these small apartments, they even raise chickens and pigs. So what are your comments on this?
It was, the subsidy period was very dysfunctional. People needed to make things work. Getting food was a problem at the time. And so people were being creative. And of course it was a mess. If you raise a pork in an apartment, a pig in an apartment, of course it's a mess. And you have chicken, and I heard many stories on how messy it was. And people remained creative. Of course, they were built at a time when people didn't have motorbikes, and now people have to climb with their motorbike, so they put things over the stairs to be able to. So it was all creativity around something that was wrong in a way, which was the proper of the subsidy period. That's what Vietnamese people did during the subsidy period.
Ông có nói về cái logic của khu tập thể, thì từ logic của khu tập thể có thể nhìn ra cái logic của lối sống của người Việt Nam thời bao cấp được không ạ?
Yes, I think it was a reflection of the same mentality, and I think as we are into 30 years now of Doi Moi, it almost seems natural that Vietnam abandoned the subsidy period because it was not working. But I think in this other work I did, which was not really my official work with the World Bank, it was part of understanding Vietnam. I had this 1 year of very rich conversations with Mr. Vo Van Kiet, trying to understand how come Vietnam came out of the subsidy period and came out well out of the subsidy period without major conflict. And one has to think that one remarkable thing about Vietnam is that in fact it only had like 10 years after reunification before change. There were 10 miserable years, horrible years in many ways. But it was a relatively short period. And I think in those conversations with Vo Van Kiet, one has to understand that at reunification, going the subsidy direction seemed almost natural. I think today we look in retrospect and it seems absurd. Who will want to do that? But if you think at the time, this was a time when the Soviet Union was seen with admiration. The Soviet Union was a country that was very poor agrarian country at the time of the revolution, and in 40 years it takes man to space, and there was a lot of admiration at the time for the power of the Soviet Union. There was a rise, a spectacular rise, like the rise of China today was something that had people in admiration. There is when I grew up as a student, there was a very famous economics manual by Paul Samuelson, who was a Nobel Prize, awarded the Nobel Prize. And it was discussing where is that the Soviet Union, in which year the Soviet Union will catch up with the United States. Today, in retrospect, one thinks that doesn't work. But at the time, it seemed like the normal way to go. And at the time, the North, with a planned economy, had won over the South with a market economy. So it really sounded like the natural way. And you had all these leaders, like Mr. Vo Van Kiet himself, who were not economists. They had been fighting a war. They had no idea. So they thought, oh, this is the way to go, before they realized it didn't work. But it was part of that mentality that you think a society where it's the collective, we live together, we share things, we don't have transactions, we only have cards so that everybody receives what they need. In principle, it may sound good, except that it doesn't work.
Hôm nay chúng ta ở đây và có rất là nhiều những cái đồ vật của thời bao cấp. Ví dụ như đây cũng là một bộ ấm chén mà tôi có thể mời ông uống một chén trà theo đúng kiểu của ngày xưa mà hơi đắng một chút. Thế rồi là xung quanh đây thì cũng có những cái đồ đạc cũ, cũng như là những cái ảnh trong cái cuốn sách này của ông về Hà Nội, cũng có những cái ảnh chung cư rất là cũ. Theo ông thì tại sao bây giờ cái việc nhớ lại hoặc là yêu thích những cái đồ vật của thời bao cấp lại đang trở thành một cái trào lưu?
So of course, now for the new generation, this happened long ago. If you think of the average age of a Vietnamese person is something like 28 years, and we're talking about 30 years of the more. So the average Vietnamese was born after all this. And but I think if I may go back to the Phu Thap Tê and the fact that they are part of the image of Hanoi, to me what is really the challenge is how to embrace modernity while at the same time remaining who you are. We have seen many East Asian cities become places that are very generic. You could be anywhere. I don't want to name cities, but very many East Asian cities lack character. And if you think of a Hanoi that has French architecture, and it has old communal houses, and it has Soviet-style buildings, and it has Phu Thap Tê, one of the challenges will be how to preserve this strong identity of a city while making it modern. In a way, a dream will be for Phu Thap Tê someday become something like Soviet chic, where they look like Phu Thap Tês outside, and inside they are modern apartments, functional, they are fabulous places. When you look at the location of the Hutaptes, the best places in town is where the Hutaptes are. And I think that will be really a challenge going forward. Now, 30 years later, I think perhaps one reflection I will have is the following, is that many countries have managed to move out of poverty. Many countries have managed to move to a middle class, but very, very few have made it to being really developed countries. If you look at all these decades, you have Korea, you have Singapore, you have Chile, and then it's all perhaps my own country, perhaps Malaysia, but you see it's very, very few. And one of the questions is, what will it take to Vietnam to be one of these? And to me that is a question that has a lot to do with the new things. I think Doi Moi was about getting markets working, but becoming a rich country is getting creativity, getting innovation, and cities are very central in that. When you think about creativity in human history, it has always been around fabulous cities. It has been around New York and London and Paris and Florence before. And I think one of the challenges I would like, I remain committed to, even if I don't live in Vietnam anymore, and this book is part of that thinking, is how to think the city in a way that it keeps that identity, that now young people like to be in bars and places that look like subsidy periods. So it remains Hanoi while being really a modern, creative city in an open society. I think that will be a big challenge.
Tuy nhiên thì chúng ta vẫn có thể giữ được cái bản sắc của mình nếu như chúng ta có những quyển sách và những cái ảnh, chứ có nhất thiết là chúng ta phải giữ lại những cái khu tập thể trên hiện trường không? Vì có thể rằng đối với nhiều người thì sẽ là ký ức của những cái ngày phải sống trong sự nghèo đói hoặc là những kỷ niệm buồn.
It's a very good question. I think the Hutapte will be a test on how Hanoi modernizes. And I think you can go in several ways. You can keep them as these very miserable places now, because people live squeezed and they have these balconies that are like bird cages. That doesn't sound like a good solution. You can take them out and replace them by modern buildings, but that may not be a very good solution in the sense that, yes, you will have the modern functionality, but you will be losing part of your history. And perhaps one of the challenges, are there ways to modernize to the Hutapte so that the look remains yellow with these blue signs and these staircases, but they are good modern apartments, and I think there are ways.
Và có thể cũng như là những ý mà ông Rama Martin nói về giá trị của những khu tập thể cũ, thì có thể những ký ức của chúng ta về cái Tết thời bao cấp ngày hôm qua cũng sẽ còn nguyên giá trị với ngày hôm nay và những ngày tiếp theo, nếu như chúng ta có một phép so sánh là cuộc sống của chúng ta đã thay đổi đến mức như thế nào. Câu hỏi cuối cùng của tôi là vì ngày Tết thì là một cái ngày mà đối với người Việt Nam rất là quan trọng, và đó là cái lúc mà người ta biểu lộ những cái hy vọng và khát khao nhất, thì theo ông thì cái ngày này, cái ngày Tết này chúng tôi nhắc lại thời bao cấp thì có thể mang lại cái điều gì cho những người dân Việt Nam ạ?
First, I think it's a great initiative. I think we all want to be embracing modern life, but with an identity. And you are touching on part of the identity of Vietnam, part of what it went through to be the modern country it is now. And I think everybody has memories of the parents growing up in these places, visiting teachers in these places, because most of the teachers used to live in places like this. So I think it's part of that Tet feeling. It's part of going back to all these memories. I think in Tet, Vietnamese people go to when they were children and they were going happily from one house to another and being treated. And I'm sure everybody has memories visiting Hutaptes of relatives and friends of the family. So I think it's a great idea, and I hope people listening to your show will also think about the identity of a very special city.
Thank you very much.